All right, so I'm going to start with video 6. The topic of this is what is government? This is foundational to the entire course. We can't speak meaningfully about U.S. and Texas government or any other government if we don't know what it is we're talking about. To really understand government, we need to know what it is. To really understand politics, which is the other thing that we will discuss heavily in this course, we need to know what that is. Um, so the basic question to consider here is what is government or the state? What makes government or the state different from other organizations? There are many organizations in our lives, and sometimes they seem like government, but they're not. There really are just a couple of specific things that make government different. And then what is politics? And once we've actually just uh, defined government, defining politics becomes really pretty simple. Um, One of the ways we can figure out what the state is to compare it to other organizations and to see what's different about it. And I'm going to use government and the state, uh, as synonyms here. State is a word that has a lot of different meanings, but here I'm going to focus on the state as what I talk about. Um, so what I'm going to suggest is for the upcoming slides that you pause, make a list of what each organization has in common with government and what things are different about it. Um, you should be able to think of at least one thing in common and one thing different for each organization. Some of these may be just as little as one or two words. I say here, please attach this to your journal assignment for an additional 5 points. Sorry, I meant to edit that. This is actually going to be something that I'm going to ask you about during the first lecture quiz. So in the first lecture quiz, you'll want to have this list handy because I'm going to want you to enter some things. Um, so here's one organization, family. Think about what does it have in common? What is different? You can pause now, write those things down, come back when you're ready for the next slide. Church. And here, I mean anything from the smallest local parish church all the way to the organization of the Roman Catholic Church. You can think about this any way you want, but religious organizations in general. What do they have in common with government, or what does government have in common with them, and what's different? So go ahead and pause and think about these. Get at least one common and one different. Now, community organizations, and here I'm talking about voluntary community organizations separate from like your city government, but things where groups of people get together to do things. So clubs, like clubs that may get together to do specific things. What do they have in common, and what is different about them? Go ahead and pause and write down your thoughts. Next, charities. So charitable giving organizations. And churches sometimes do this, but think of independent ones. You can also think about the charitable church drives. And of course, community organizations often do charitable things too. But think about charitable giving organizations that may raise money to help the poor, or they may raise money for some activity. What do these groups have in common with government, and what's different about them compared to government? Um, and then finally, businesses or the market. So you can think about either think about individual businesses, or you can think about the market as a whole, all of the transactions, all of the ways that people come together in business transactions. What does that have in common with the government, and what's different about it? So write those things down. Write down one or two of each. So now we're going to move to a different kind of organization. Uh, and I'm going to give you three examples of organizations that also have things in common with government, but also have things that are different. So for each one, think about what they have in common with government and what's different. So the first one is going to be organized crime. So in the United States, we talk about the mafia. In other countries, they talk about different kinds of organized crime, but gangs, organized crime groups that commit, that are not just one or two individuals, but big crime organizations. What do they have in common with government and what is different? Vigilantes. So vigilante groups are not a uniquely American phenomenon, but the name comes from America. We had things in the West, in the United States, in the Wild West called vigilance committees that would go out when someone had done something like stealing or murder, theft, rape, any kind of violent or property crime. These vigilance committees would go out, and typically they would execute them. And these were not government organizations. These were just essentially the whole town would get together and go out and do this. Because a lot of times the nearest U.S. Marshal or sheriff might be several days ride away. And so they would just go out and take things into their own hands. So what do they have in common with government and what's different? You can think about one or two examples of in common and different for each. Terrorist organizations. Again, these terrorist organizations do have some things in common with government, and then they have some things that are different. So here I'm talking about political terrorist organizations, and the difference between terrorist and freedom fighter. We don't need to worry about that. I'm just saying that non-state organizations. So these are not government organizations. So an actual organized rebellion that claims to be the government and holds territory doesn't qualify here. We're talking about totally non-state organizations that don't hold territory, but that do commit acts of terrorism or acts of violence in order to change people's minds. What do they have in common with government and what is different? So pause that, write those down, and then come back. So if you're back now, I'm going to give you the question for the quiz, or rather the answer. The first set of organizations all had one thing that they don't have that government has. The second group all have one thing that government has that the first group doesn't have. So the first set were all what we think of as legitimate organizations, that is, worthwhile, acceptable organizations, and they don't use violence. The second group are organizations that we consider illegitimate, but they do use violence. The definition of government that we'll get to is that it's the one legitimate group that is able to use violence to change people's behavior, coercive violence. So these three organizations on the screen here all use coercive violence, but they're considered illegitimate. The other organizations, all those voluntary organizations where you can leave or not, they don't use violence and they're considered legitimate. They're all considered, perfectly legitimate. Government is both legitimate and able to use violence to change people's behavior. So the key difference, so the question is going to be, what's the difference between the two sets of groups? And they're going to be two words. I'm going to ask you to tell me the two differences between group 1 and group 2. So what is the state? Ultimately, what the state comes down to is this, and this is a picture from the United States of a drug-free, gun-free school zone, which is a common thing in the United States. We set up these zones around schools that are supposed to be drug and gun-free, and if they aren't, violators will face severe federal, state, and local criminal penalties. So what ultimately does the government have or the state have that no other organization has. It's the ability to impose legitimate, coercive force on people in the form of severe penalties, severe forceful penalties. The government can put you in jail and can arrest you and put you in jail. The government has the military. But it's not just that it has violence, because all of those criminal groups, the vigilantes, the terrorists, they have violence too. It's the fact that it also has legitimacy. So it has the combination of the two. And so that's ultimately the definition of the state. The official definition of the state is it's the organized, coercive use of violent force commonly accepted as legitimate. I'm going to go through these words one at a time. It's organized. It's not a one-off. It's not just an individual or small group. It's not somebody saying, I am the emperor, and not having anything to back it up. It's coercive. It's intended to change behavior. The government doesn't engage in the use of violent force just for kicks. Every use of violent force by the government is intended to change behavior. It may be intended to make people behave in ways the majority wants. It may just be to collect taxes, but that's still a behavior. So it's intended to change behavior. It's violent force. It is physical violent force. It's not just economic power. The state does have a lot of economic power, especially the U.S. government. The U.S. government has more economic power than any other entity around, but so do big corporations. And the state's economic power is not based on voluntary transactions. You can't walk away from it. It's based on taxation and regulation. It's still based on, even its economic power is ultimately based on the fact that it's got police, it's got prisons, and it's got a military. It's got a way to enforce taxation. Taxation isn't optional. Buying something from a business is optional. So it's not just economic power. Economic power can be hugely powerful, but it is an order of magnitude. It's not even an order of magnitude. It is qualitatively different from violent physical force. Legitimacy. It's commonly accepted as the rightful government. In republics and democracies where the people have a say in the government and own the government, and the government actually works for the people, that's a good reason to commonly accept it as the rightful government. In dictatorships, it's often just that it's accepted as the only game in town. But people who live in dictatorships still tend to accept the government as legitimate, at least until somebody gets rid of them. So it's the accepted rightful government. There is an additional thing that's often put in here, and that it's the monopoly on violent use of force that's accepted as legitimate. There's a reason I didn't say monopoly, because in the United States, it's not a monopoly. It's a duopoly. The federal government has it, and the state governments have it, and they each have their own that they get directly from the people. So we'll come back to that when I talk about federalism a little bit. But it is, in the U.S., it's not really a monopoly. So that definition that you may have heard before doesn't really fit in our context, but this does. The state is the organized, coercive use of violent force commonly accepted as legitimate. So what ultimately is the state? Really, to the citizen, yeah, it has the military, and that's important if you're not a citizen, but internally to the citizen, government is the only institution, it's the only organization that can send the police to arrest you and to throw you in prison. That's the distinguishing characteristic. There isn't another organization that can do that on its own power. You violate the rules of a corporation and you're trespassing on their property, yeah, they can call the police, they can call the state and say, hey, can you send the police to arrest somebody? But it is the state that does it. If a homeowner has someone trespassing in their house, burglarizing their house, yeah, that homeowner can call and ask the state to do this, but those police work for the state. It's only the state that can actually do this. So then what is politics? Well, it turns out the definition of politics that we're going to use is pretty simple. Um, take a minute. You can take a minute to write down your thoughts on the question. When you're ready, unpause and come back, and I'll give you an answer. So politics is the process of making collective decisions, that is, group decisions, but it is specifically making those group decisions in the context of the state or government. So, so politics is the process of making these group decisions in terms of government. How do we make group decisions about government? What's important here is when you think about it, government is the organization. So a lot of people think about government as the organization that solves collective action problems for groups of people. Collective action problems are just when a group of people want to cooperate to achieve a common goal, or that's what collective action is. Collective action problems are when there are things that stand in the way of cooperating. Um, but collective action is just when a group of people cooperate to achieve a common goal. And when you think about it, government's not the only thing that does that. Government is the only thing that uses that that legitimately uses force to achieve common goals. Lots of things achieve common goals. Um, so then the people that think about it as being collective choice, making collective decisions about collective action. But the problem is that doesn't quite get it because, businesses cooperate. People cooperate every time there's a voluntary transaction. That's actually two people cooperating. It's actually usually many people cooperating, including people who aren't even there. Um, but um, government, what's different about it is it's not voluntary. And so every organization we looked at, all of the peaceful organizations, the legitimate ones, the church, the family, the market, charitable organizations, community organizations, they all engage in collective action, and they engage in at least some collective action that benefits society. So what's different about politics? Um, all of those legitimate ones lack one thing the state has, which is the use of violent force. All of the illegitimate ones have the use of violent force, but they don't have legitimacy. So government is the one organization, the one legitimate organization that works that works for collective action using coercive use of violent force. Um, so so all of the other things that those organizations use, they have money, they have organization, persuasion, leadership, cooperation, they help people, they provide services, they provide products. Those are regular features of non-coercive voluntary organizations. So they're not necessarily political. All of those things make collective decisions and do collective action in the voluntary sphere. The state is the coercive sphere, and politics is about making collective decisions in the coercive sphere. So that's the difference. Politics is about making collective decisions or group decisions in the coercive sphere. So another aspect, if you think about some words or phrases that come to mind when you think about politics or when you think about the government, what are some words or phrases that come to mind? A lot of the words and phrases are expensive, distant, politician or campaign, voting, decision making, rights, borders, controversial. These are the kinds of things that come to mind for a lot of people, but that's not necessarily the case. Now, these are some Houston pictures here, so hopefully you get to come to Houston and see some of these things. This is the Houston Metro Rail, which I sometimes ride to campus. This is the building where my office is on the UH campus. It's the Philip Guthrie Hoffman Hall. Um, the Metro Rail is paid for with local, state, and federal taxes. It is a government organization. The University of Houston is a state university supported by state and federal taxes, plus private donations and student tuition. Student tuition pays something like 15 to 20% of the bills. Most of the bills are paid by taxpayers and private donors. So government and politics influence these. The city of Houston, if I get up and I turn on the faucet in the morning to get a drink of water or to wash my face, or if I, even flush the toilet, the water supply and the sewer come from the city of Houston Public Works. And that road that's running alongside the train here, if I don't ride the train, I may take a bus, which is also Metro, which is government. But if I drive on this road, and Houston Public Works is responsible for that. I also drive on a road that's a freeway, and it's provided by federal and state dollars. Again, it's all politics. Politics touches our lives from the time we wake up in the morning until the time we go to bed, and even while we're asleep, the government is protecting us from violence and other things. So I'll skip this. You can read this if you want to. I'm not going to read it to you. My point is, politics isn't distant. It's always right here wherever you are. It touches everything that we do, constantly impacting our lives. All of us are involved whether we think about it or not. And it certainly can be expensive, but it's not always about money. The point is, whether you want to think about politics or not, politics makes a difference in our lives. Sometimes we can choose to be blissfully ignorant, and that's fine. But sometimes that can come back to bite us because government is involved in everything. Politics, it turns out, being so involved in our lives and holding so much power through the power of coercive physical force, has huge power to achieve good ends if we have common goals so that we are largely all in agreement. But it also has incredible power to do harm when it imposes severe criminal penalties inappropriately. And the inappropriate, ranges from imposing them when they're not deserved, also to imposing them for things where there's not common agreement. Setting up criminal penalties for things where there's not common agreement that they should even be crimes. There's an incredible amount of power to do harm, and so everything in the American system is meant to make sure that this harm is limited. The American system is a lot less about achieving these good ends than it is about preventing the bad things government can do. That's the most important thing to remember about the American system. And this goes all the way back to the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution. George Washington, the first president of the United States, the general who led American forces during the American Revolution, said government is not reason, it's not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. That is the philosophy of U.S. government going back to the founding and even before, because it's also a big chunk of British philosophy with regard to government, but the U.S. took it to the next level. Frederick Douglass, who was a former slave and abolitionist who spoke all across the country before the Civil War, before the U.S. abolished slavery, said power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So this is another aspect of American politics, the idea that it's important for citizens to demand government respect their rights. So Frederick Douglass wasn't talking about asking government to give him something. He was asking government to stop being tyrannical, to stop taking people's liberty from them. And so that's what he was talking about. And he was really talking about limiting the power of government to control people. So to think about this semester, um, some of you probably watch some American movies. Maybe some of you don't. But this is John Wick from the John Wick series. Pretty popular series of 5 movies now in the United States. He's a hired assassin. In the 5th movie, we find out maybe he's not as bad a guy as all that. But his job is to go. He works for organized crime, and his job is to go out and take out organized criminals for other organized criminals. The question is, though, who's morally culpable when someone hires an assassin? Is it the assassin or is it the client who hires him? Is John Wick the one who's ultimately responsible, or is it the person who does the hiring? And I'm just going to leave it there for you to think about. Remember, I'm going to post a lecture quiz. I'm going to put it right under the video in Canvas, so you'll see it right under the video. And I'm going to ask you a question about the difference between the 2 groups. It's going to be a 1-question quiz, and it's going to be about, so you might want to have your notes, but it's going to be about the difference between the 2 sets of groups I gave you. The first set that had family and the church and those, and then the second set that had organized crime, terrorists, and vigilantes. That is it. I will have the next video out for you soon.